Welcome back, everyone. We are talking about Venus today, and we are going to go through all 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, we are talking about Venus from the esoteric perspective, that is the soul-centered point of view. So if it's your first time on my channel, please bear that in mind, that while we will look at some of the traditional and exoteric, that is personality expressions of Venus through the 12 signs, we are going to lay emphasis upon the awakening of the spiritual consciousness, as esoteric astrology is defined by the awakening of consciousness and the orientation towards truth and surrendering and focusing on the path of service, and that fundamental flip that happens when we start working with the revelation that we are all one, essentially. So let's have a very important and needed recap on Venus from the exo and esoteric perspective in astrology. So Venus is the goddess of love. She is the Aphrodite, the goddess of sex, desire, materiality. In her exoteric rulership of Taurus, we see the enjoyment of the five senses, indulgences of substance, and the moon is exalted in Taurus, the moon being the mother or matter principle. And in Libra, we have relationship, reciprocity, give and take. I desire you, you desire me, I want to be one with you. Libra being a marriage sign and the sign of the weighing of the opposites. Okay, so we have these themes of relationship, desire, materiality, sensuality that come with Venus, at least from the exoteric standpoint. Venus esoterically is said to be the higher self of Earth, in a sense, and is one of the, if not the most evolved planet in our entire solar system. She is the fifth ray lord, the fifth ray of concrete knowledge and science, and has much to do with the reasoning faculty and a right perception. Here we reveal the true meaning of the term hitting the bullseye, which is a reference to Taurus, and the fifth ray corresponds to the ajna center, the center between the brows, where true illumination is achieved. The real meaning of enlightenment here from the esoteric angle, from the ageless wisdom angle, is a revelation of this. Sometimes people can refer to an enlightenment experience through more of the mystical heart opening, which is a more Neptunian kind of enlightenment, the revelation of universal love and universal connection, the mystic consciousness. But enlightenment is truly the awakening of this mental center where we come to know, with a capital K, fifth ray of concrete knowledge, who we really are and what the truth of the spiritual life is. The fifth ray is connected to the fifth kingdom of souls. The third kingdom is that of the animal kingdom, and the fourth kingdom is the human kingdom. So we're just prefacing some of the broader significations here of Venus and just how important it is. And before we start with Aries, one last point I want to make is that of the true nature of love, which of course Venus is the goddess of love, and it's known about desire and reciprocity and relationship, as we just mentioned. But when we really start to ask the question, okay, but what is love really? Is this dynamic that I'm having with this person, is it really loving? It feels good, but is it truly loving? So this point of reflection, of contemplation, and the weighing of the opposites, Libra, and starting to become conscious and discriminating. This is a function of the mental faculty. And through that process of contemplation, reflection, and eventually right perception, that leads to knowledge. And then the deeper expression becomes the translation of knowledge into wisdom, and Taurus is a wisdom sign. But we'll circle back to those when we touch on Venus through the 12 signs, when we get to Taurus and Libra. So love and logic. And when we truly go through the lessons in life of love, and when we reflect back on our relationships, we see that oftentimes when we said we were in love, even if we felt that strong pull and it felt like falling in love, maybe when we reflect back, we go, oh, but I didn't really act in a loving way, or that wasn't really reciprocal, or there wasn't really a transpersonal element of love to that, or it faded very quickly or something like that. So in a funny sense, Venus in this way almost acts a little bit like Saturn. And of course, Saturn is a third ray planet and also connected to the mental faculty, where we get more mature with it with time. And the evolutionary astrologers really capture that point quite well. because Venus is typically seen as one of the great benefics along with Jupiter, and she is. But we can also evolve through our Venus placement and through our Venus experiences, whereas we can reflect back on our Venusian, desirous, relational experiences and start to go, yeah, maybe I kind of missed the mark there, didn't quite hit the bullseye. So Venus is about the awakening of the higher self, the development of discernment and discrimination, and eventually coming to unify the opposites. But that first relies on becoming aware of what those opposites are, this and that, discernment and discrimination. We're getting a little flicker there of Venus and its esoteric rulership of Gemini, but we'll get to that shortly. Let's start with Venus in Aries. So Venus is in a sign of detriment. That is, it's a weakening of the Venusian quality when we find it in Aries. Now, there is an exoteric articulation of this and a deeper esoteric meaning, but we'll start exoterically at first. We might say that the relational principle, that which is about connecting and trying to bring things together, harmonizing, the harmonizing quality of Venus, gets usurped by the margin tendency to jump impulsively into things, to accentuate the me-ness and the non-sharing element, or the focus on me, as opposed to Libra, the opposite sign, where we get a contemplation of the two. So this margin quality can make for a very impulsive movement with Venus when we find Venus in this sign. The Sun is exalted in Aries, so we might say the ego or the personality is so big and bright. Here we have this element of combustion where Venus is weakened through the sun's rays. So what we see at the exoteric level is often an impulsiveness and a deep drive for that need to fuse immediately. So there we've got the immediate penetrative quality of Mars, and we still get that coming together of Venus, but it loses some of its grace and its ability to contemplate and reflect, because that actually requires a pause and a bit of spaciousness, which we do find in Libra. But Aries is an impulsive sign. It wants things to happen now, right? So it loses some of the gracefulness of Venus as we would see her in other places. Now, esoterically, there's a higher order for these detriments and falls and exaltations. So we say that esoterically, the mental faculty in its highest sense, that which perceives truth and understanding, dwindles in the face of the central spiritual sun being exalted in Aries. So in the last analysis, God, or the will, is the fundamental guiding energy, right? So that is the lesser luminaries, and in the occult sense, Venus and Mercury are luminary planets. But those become less important in the final stand against God. So that is the deeper esoteric signification. But of course it trickles down and has these effects through the lesser planets and through the personality form as it expresses through the Maya, through the exoteric life. So that finesse can be lost with Venus in Aries. The desire to fuse, and at the higher octave of Aries, is the merging with the spirit. That's where we get the impatience from. It's, I see the future, I see the mind of God. Mercury is the esoteric ruler of Aries. When we receive the divine messages of God, let's think of Leonardo da Vinci, who was an Aries personality, or had Mercury in Aries. I think he was Taurus sun. Mercury in Aries, and he was an artist, so we had the Taurian artistry. But the transmitting of those divine messages through the artistic work. So it's a seeing beyond, and that trickles down and can translate to a kind of impatience. And patience can be cultivated through the opposite sign Libra, where things have to come into balance. Yes, I might see the future, but it has to come into relationship with substance and the rule of materiality. And Libra is a third ray sign, so having to work with the rules of matter. So a fun example, I think, of some of the lesser exoteric articulations of this placement, we have, blanking on her name, Elizabeth Taylor, who had Venus in Aries, I think in the 5th house, 8 marriages, And she was very much an Aphrodite type too, just because of her beauty and being a film star and the kinds of roles she got. She was an incarnation of that archetype. And the immature Aphrodite, and Aphrodite is one of the goddesses attributed to Venus, so we might say Aphrodite is going to express more of her immature Puella, that is the eternal child, the girl child, ways, immature Aphrodite ways in the sign Aries. So there can be a love of the conjunctio. Oh, I want to merge with you right now. I feel my attraction, my Mars, Venus pull. Come to me right now. So there's a real drive and a speeding up again, that loss of finesse, grace when it comes to that process of merging. We got to merge right now. And it can be very magnetic and potent, but then it fades really quickly, because in the end of the day, love requires logic and truth to be lasting. And part of that involves having the right discernment about the nature of the relationship that you're in. Okay, but who are you as a person? Who am I a person? What are our differences? Are they complementary? What are our values? Are they shared? All of those questions get thrown off of the table with Venus in Aries. It can just be about that the grasping and that fusing that happens there. So my recommendations for this placement are to really polarize into that Libran quality, which is always a truism for any sign that you're working with in the zodiac, particularly with a personal planet, and most certainly the big three, sun, moon, rising. To work with the polar opposite, there needs to be a slowing down from the personality level. This is how we're creating roundedness with the personality. Slowing down to bring together the opposites in a contemplative and meaningful way. We have to drop the margin, projection, lust, desire game that is really pulled into that astral sphere of Venus as she expresses as that desire nature. So it's really amped up in a way. Slow that down and really start to ask the right questions. We need to develop that ability to value properly and therefore establish right relationship. Venus in Taurus, this is of course its exoteric domicile. So Venus is at home here, and in much the same way that the moon as the mother matter principle is exalted in the fixed earthy sign of Taurus, Venus really lavishes in the five senses of pleasure and enjoyment, food, the simple comforts of life, stability, regular rhythms, being chill, being relaxed, having the nice relaxed time. Venus can also, as an attracting energy, oh, I didn't touch on this too, by the way, but Venus is a fifth ray planet, but her expression at the exoteric level in a way has a sort of second ray personality. The high level of the fifth ray is to bring opposites together, and it's a very alchemical and scientific process of fusion, because all alchemy really requires a right understanding of this substance and this substance. There's your reason and logic, and then we have to bring them together. But the second ray is much more about, just bring it all together into one. So as an exoteric expression, that's where we get that kind of more emotional need to join and merge. That's the astral aspect of desire. So back to Venus in Taurus, this astral nature of bringing things onto itself and merging with other things. Venus in Taurus can be a great placement for the attracting of matter, of riches, of possessions. There can be a possessiveness around possessions. In matters of love and relationship, there may be a tendency to be possessive or graspy in the relationship itself or with the other person. But more or less, it is a very home placement for Venus. Now, Taurus esoterically is a knowledge sign. So where we just described the sensuality and the enjoyment in a very exoteric Venusian way of the five senses, talking myself as a Taurus, the smell, taste, touch. The five senses, when we go deeper and we ask, but what is this? What is this? What is this? There we get the science element. So rather than blind merging with sensuality, now we get the intimacy with the senses, which is very Taurus, in a way where we become conscious of the nature of the thing that we are examining. And this is where we get experiential knowledge. So Venus expressing in Taurus, starting to awaken to its higher promptings, will demonstrate a desire to acquire, right, coming back to the magnetism, acquire knowledge, eventually leading to the intelligent distribution of that knowledge. And that is more generally a Taurian theme anyway, because Taurus esoterically is that of knowledge, and it becomes wisdom. The Buddha was born, enlightened, and died in Taurus. What was the main lesson of Buddhism? Detachment, the middle way, which is also a Libran quality. But rather than grasping on desire or becoming averse to desire, becoming neutral, becoming just allowing for a natural relationship with substance, and also the right valuing. The desire for possessions reveals what you value, and Venus is often connected to valuing, but once again, it's that evolution from blind attraction based on what feels good to me, lower astrally polarized aspect of desire, wherever it's found, into a contemplation, reflection, what actually is important? What do I really want? And ultimately, from the esoteric standpoint, what we truly want is God, union with the soul, and true understanding. And this is enlightenment. The keynote of Taurus is the eye is opened and all is illumined. Illumination. So this is the true enlightenment here. It's the acquisition of knowledge. Now, knowledge in and of itself isn't necessarily wisdom or spiritual understanding. So Venus in Taurus, yes, as it matures or starts activating its higher promptings, it will be a drive towards knowledge. And this is why we can see prominent Venus and Taurus often in the charts of scientists. Again, the five senses. What is this? What is this? It's penetrating deeper into the nature of matter rather than I'm just going to merge with matter in that astral way. But that still can be limited to a kind of rationalistic or materialistic, heady attitude. This is where we can get the stubbornness with Taurus as well. This is what it is. It's a deeper, the deeper octave is where we bring that love element, which we can also see with Venus in terms of the merging of the mind and the heart, because that's another pair of opposites. And Venus merges pairs of opposites. So mind and heart, and then the right distribution of knowledge to share with all. So that's a bit of a spiel on Taurus. We kind of danced around a few different things there, but back to specifically Venus in Taurus, acquiring knowledge, and then eventually being able to penetrate to the core of any form. This is where Taurus is associated with artistry. Taurus is a fourth ray sign, but you know, really coming to see what is the true divine source of the idea behind the form. This is the artistry. Taurus can be artistic. Venus is connected to the arts for this reason. But it's the shaping of matter to reflect the divine. I mentioned Da Vinci before, who had Mercury in Aries receiving those divine messages, but he was a Taurus sun and a Venus Taurus as well. And what did he do? I mean, the artistry, but the way in which the art works perfectly aligned. There's all these subtle details, like all the people that have dissected, you know, all the occult underpinnings, the religious motifs under his paintings. And even with the Mona Lisa and the recent one as well, I'm blanking on the name of it, but I'll pop it up there, where there's a certain androgynous quality to these figures, merging of the opposites right there, bringing the divine or the sacred androgyne there. So the way in which Venus in Taurus attempts to refine and artistically perfect and articulate a form so that it really captures the essence of the spiritual center, bullseye, the true seeing, third eye, and bringing that deeply, the incarnation of beauty. But again, the higher octave of beauty, which is the way in which the form can reflect the divine. So that's Venus in Taurus. Venus in Gemini. This is its esoteric domicile. Venus rules Gemini from the soul-centered point of view. And what have we been talking about? The merging of opposites, right? The bringing the two halves together. And Gemini is the sign of the twins, of the brothers. Mercury in Gemini has that dualism, the ping-ponging forth, back and forth of the different opposites. This idea, that idea, I like this, I don't like this, the dialectic. And Venus will bring, from the exoteric level, in this sign, a love of communication, a desire for the dialectic of the back and forth, that mercurial lightness with Gemini. Oh, like, turn me on with your words. Let's have a good conversation. Also a great placement generally for building rapport with any person from any walk of life. This is the placement of the one with the common touch. Why? Because Venus has a tendency to bring things together, and with Gemini you can connect any idea together. Gemini is the ultimate sign of relationship. All air signs have to do with relationship, but Gemini is all relationships in every possible way. The relationship between cosmos and the earth and up and it's any which direction, whereas in Libra it becomes more about, it gets more concretized and a little bit more specific. You and me, what is the flow of the reciprocity there? But Gemini makes these links, right? This is where we can get that scattered mercurial and superficial quality in Gemini in its lesser expression. So with Venus in Gemini, there can be a problem of a mercurial, non-committal attitude to matters of love. So that could be really wanting variety or getting sick of people really quickly sometimes. Yes, a capacity to talk, but yeah, okay, you're boring me, I want to do. And that is a quintessential lesser aspect of Mercury. When someone has a mercurial personality, jack of all trades, right? Master of none. In the case of loving relationships and dynamics with people, a kind of jack of all trades. Let's say a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, but that difficulty really grounding and really committing sometimes can be the challenge exoterically with Venus in Gemini. So once again, it becomes about the awakening of right perception and valuing what actually is important. Because yes, while there, from the exoteric standpoint, there's a love of communication, it's not necessarily a transpersonal value, and there's a deeper question of what is the real deeper relationship or idea that I want to communicate with, and what might that look like in a relationship with the other person. But back to this common touch thing, the Gemini Venus person, at whatever level it's expressing, will be a great conversationalist and will be able to find the point in common with anyone. That's again that scattered like the wind that we have with Gemini. I can sort of, oh, I can grab that thing and I can talk to you about that. I'm a Venus in Gemini native, okay, in the first house. And I can remember being at parties and things in my teenage years, and I would always try and find the person who was a bit shy and not able to kind of come out of their shell. I'd go and plonk down by them and really draw out their playfulness or open them up through a conversation. That's a very common touch quality there. It was something that was really coming alive for me at that time, really seeing that I could, well, talk to anyone basically. So that's Venus and Gemini as the common touch. Then we talked about the superficial mercurial problem. Let's get into the esoteric signification. Gemini at the higher level is the opposites of the soul and the personality. So Venus then, or Mercury, when it starts to awaken to its higher promptings, will start relaying the messages from the soul to the personality. No longer this communication horizontally with words and ideas and what I like to talk about. Receiving messages from the soul and then going, oh, okay, I've got this part of myself which is starting to awaken, spiritual self, but then there's my personality self. So this ping-ponging happens in Gemini. Mercury serves this function of awakening the differences between the two, but it doesn't alchemically fuse. Venus alchemically fuses because she's the fifth ray lord. So Venus then, once that discrimination and discernment has been had, will bring the two halves together. It'll work out how to wed. Now we get a very Libran vibe here too, where Gemini is almost functioning now as a marriage sign in the way that Libra tends to be in the exoteric sense. We're wedding the two halves together. We're bringing, we're working out what the relationship is. This is bridge building. Again, we talked about the common touch, and Venus will build bridges wherever she goes, building bridge to the item that I desire. I want to gain it in the exoteric way that we've been discussing. But it's the building of the bridge and the Antakarana, rainbow bridge, which is embodied through the sign Gemini. It describes that process. We're bringing the two halves together with Gemini. So with Venus in Gemini, we're going to have, from the esoteric standpoint now, when we're working with the spiritual life, an emphasis on the conflict of the two different lives. And that will be the mercurial element, because Mercury is fourth ray, harmony through conflict. And so the question for a Venus in Gemini person is, okay, I've got this and this, how do I bring them together? Do I pick one or the other? How do I have both? Venus will eventually come to that answer of how to bring them both together. The answer is both, but in right relationship, because Gemini is waxing and waning. So usually the power of form does lessen in Gemini. So some aspect of the personality will wane and become less significant because we start valuing, reevaluating, and becoming more and more conscious of who we really are. This is the mental thing again, right discrimination. Who am I really? But that doesn't mean that matter gets left behind, because we still have a personality, obviously. So that process eventually will resolve, where there's a realignment of how the personality life will fit in with the soul life, and then there'll be a marriage, and we'll understand, oh, this is the right relationship between the two. But that conflict will be emphasized with Venus in Gemini, and you can look to where Libra is in the chart to see what themes that conflict or that question mark will occur. Okay? Venus in Cancer. I really like this placement. From the personality angle, we get that sentimentality and emotionality that comes with Cancer. The Venus in Cancer person will have a great love and desire to experience relationship through that safety of the Cancerian sphere, the home life, activities at home in the Cancerian crab, the things that bring nourishment and warmth and stability to cooking, food, staying at home, drinking the wine, watching the TV, a partner, a desire for a partner that can revel in that or share in that process. And a love or appreciation of the integrity of the mother principle. And that is why we can see a conservative quality of that commitment. And commitment we associate with Capricorn, but Cancer, Capricorn, remember, they're the sort of two halves of the same coin, really. So there's a similarity between the two, in a way. And in Cancer, of course, that's a very lunar sign, and it's about the traditions or the ancestry. So all the things that we're coming from and that we can rely on back here, and the emphasis on the importance of the family unit and what is needed to nourish the life of the soul, which would emerge, let's say, in the next sign, Leo. And of course, Neptune is the esoteric ruler of Cancer, connecting it to Pisces. There's a theme with the religious motif here. What does religion, particularly Christianity, tend to put an emphasis upon? The family unit. And, mother, father, loving relationship, devoted to the growth of the family unit that serves the child the best, creates a stable psychology. So coming back to Venus in Cancer, a desire for that deep commitment. Cancer goes deep. It runs all the way to the core of matter. So there's a wanting, a yearning for those kinds of themes there from the personality standpoint. And often there can be that emotional sentimentality too, because it's the attachments from the personality standpoint, from the astral standpoint, that which is important to me. Esoterically, this is a very mental position. We have fifth ray Venus in the sign of Cancer, which has rays 3 and 7 expressing through it. These are building signs. Cancerians, yes, they're known to be emotional, but one of the other ways in which the evolution of Cancer starts to express is through being very mentally sharp. They can be manipulative, but that's part of that instinctuality that comes, the strategizing. But they can be brilliant strategists. Cancer rules mass consciousness, has a good big connection to psychology. And then think about media marketing a brand, and how marketing, so often relies on that manipulating of the human psychology to sell the product, right? Taps into a deep place of what one needs, the human needs, right? Using that sensitivity to the human grounding, to all of that psychological intelligence that comes out of Cancer, and this which builds the forms, which then allows for consciousness to eventually emerge and become realized. Again, Leo. It's the mother sign, right? Building of the forms. So we can see brilliant use of mind here. So Venus in Cancer, we talked about Venus in Taurus with the artistic precision of the form and sensing the idea, we're going to see a bit of that flavor, but with the need, really respecting, loving and nourishing, now going to the higher octaves of the spiritualization of this planet here, the esoteric spiritualization. The love of and the appreciation of, the acknowledgement of those forms, those Cancerian forms that help nourish and bring life to the human being. There will be a deep respect for the family context, for the community context, for the church, all of these things that are part of, it's going deeper into human family now. That's the Neptunian quality of Cancer here, and this is why Cancer is one of the most Christ-like signs. Deep love, but it's universal love for the human family. And so a great respect and honouring of what the Great Mother says is needed for the support and the nourishment of the human being, and for the love principle. Carl Jung had the two occult luminaries in Cancer, Mercury and Venus, and that was through his 6th house. So he, of course, mapped the collective unconscious. In his case, really emphasizing the Neptunian quality. He had the real psychic quality here with Venus in Cancer. It doesn't necessarily always touch on that, because it might hit that angle of Neptune that's more about the universal love. But in the case of Jung, we really see the Neptunian god of the waters, and he mapped the collective unconscious in the context of a very 6th house way of building the personality, very specific of how to help the individual individuate. But that's a great example of that, the mind penetrating, because we're always going to see a penetrative mind bringing the light into substance with Venus esoterically, because that's the 5th ray and that's the ajna center, but into those Cancerian depths. So there's a real seeing with this placement of what the human being needs, what the community needs, and how to best, becoming very conscious of the distribution of love, Neptune. And that can also be connected to substance as well, because Cancer and Taurus both have that connection to materiality in that way, and especially Cancer when it's with its esoteric associations with wanting to house everybody and make sure everyone has exactly what they need to thrive, to flourish. So I quite love this placement esoterically. Venus in Leo can be a bit of a tricky one. Because of Leo being a 1st ray sign, it's got rays 1 and 5, there's an intense self-consciousness in Leo. In its lesser expression, it can be a self-obsession, where it doesn't really come across as conscious or aware at all, because it is conscious. It's just more about me and how I'm interacting with the environment. That's the centralizing quality of the 1st ray and the sun as its ruler. What me and my environment and how I'm expressing myself, exoteric sun ruling the animal body. And so Leo's connection to fashion and expression, and often associated with the arts, not in the same way that Taurus is, which is more about the artistic precision in the process, but more about wanting to express my creational life force, right? There's a kind of egocentricity in it. So Venus in Leo it's a bit of the movie star placement, right? Can be a little bit prima donna, a little bit sometimes from the exoteric standpoint. And there may be a kind of a pickiness and a preferential treatment to the kinds of relationships that we see. And this is, I really like this person for this reason, and sometimes superficiality around what it is that one desires about a person. It can be very much in relationship to me. This person dresses well and that reflects well on me. And so that's why I want to be with them. Again, we're talking about a lesser expression here. As it matures a little bit, still exoteric, but we may just, there's a love of the romance and the need for the adoration and that the kind of lifting up of the ego sometimes. And in the best case scenario for the exoteric placement of this would be being with a person that the Leo in Venus can really worship in a way, and also feel that worship. So people can talk about the romanticism being really important with this sign, really needing to be in that the process of that kind of godlike worship of one another. So there can be a little bit of that flavour with Venus in Leo. Esoterically, fifth ray sign, planet, in a sign that has the fifth ray through it. And now we're seeing the unbiased and unprejudiced or expansion of that love principle through the Neptune, because esoterically Leo is ruled by the sun veiling Neptune, which is why we can see a very Christian kind of revelation or mystical revelation in Leo at the esoteric level. It's still the self-consciousness, but is what am I really? I am the universal consciousness. I am the incarnation of God, not in the megalomaniac sense, which can happen, but in the surrender of the lower self. There's a crucifixion element there to that higher quality, and there's universal love. So the higher expression of Leo has a very Neptunian, universal loving quality to it. So all relationships, Venus, are seen as a reflection of that divine love of the Father. Leo connected to children too, in terms of my progeny, that which comes out of me. Think of the monastic leaders, the monarchies, and I have to have my sons and daughters so they can reign and follow my kingdom. That's the idea of the legacy, or the mythic legendariness of, in this case, the personality, but the higher octave of that is the kingdom of God and claiming the kingdom of God. So Venus here is the recognition that all people and all dynamics and interpersonal relationships can be and are a reflection of that universal Father and an extension of that connection to the Father. So this spiritualization of the principle of relationship, and also a scientific inquiry to the nature of the self. So it pairs again quite nicely with Neptune, because we just spoke about that with Cancer, because Neptune is the esoteric ruler of Cancer as well. So there is this kind of blending of the qualities here. But with this first ray emphasis and the solar emphasis in Leo, it's a bit more about the consciousness rather than just, not that it's less than, but as we spoke about in Cancer, the forms and the nourishment's a bit more about the building blocks of matter. Whereas in Leo, it's the science of the self. So Venus in Leo can bring a real close examination on exactly what is the nature of love, of mystic love. We're going to bring more of a flooding in of that fifth ray quality, because Venus is a fifth ray sign, and we're emphasizing the fifth ray through Leo. A very intense awareness of who am I, who are you, we are the divine, let's revel in that, let's connect over that. And once again, the precision of self-awareness in terms of coming to be actualized in the higher self, coming to know who you are really, and to single-pointedly hold that and to encourage that in the relationship with the other, which is the higher octave of what we talked about before, with the exoteric expression of the needing to worship one another. But it's the needing to acknowledge the God in you and the God in me and the true aspect of the self, and holding steadfast to our capacity to incarnate that. Venus in Virgo. A most interesting placement. And it's another one that I actually really love, though it is challenging from the exoteric standpoint. It is the sign of fall for Venus. And fall becomes very interesting. Fall and exaltation, just as we touched on with detriment and domicile rulership, but they become interesting motifs when we understand them esoterically. And let's start exoterically. We can say that the love principle, or that which wants to bring things together and harmonize and find that connection, falls. We said with Aries it loses its finesse. In Virgo it becomes too nitpicky. And that nitpickiness could be relative to other people, like the native with Virgo and Venus might be real critical of the kinds of people they find themselves in relationship with. Naggy, nitpicky, wanting to better things all the time, even though there may not be nothing wrong. It's getting too lost in the details, right? That's one expression of it in its negative sense. Another way I've seen it show up is the perfectionism of the body, and sometimes eating disorders or body dysmorphia. It's something about the way in which perception, remember Venus is about perception and the mind, it gets lost or bogged down into the details of the form, right? And it's veiled by materiality, whereas the true function of Venus is to become conscious of the spiritual light, right? And we're going to see a different variation of that very problem when we get to Venus in Scorpio, which is a sign of detriment for Venus there as well, because the Scorpio is the sign of the Maya, Virgo the sign of materiality. So bits and pieces, this. So it can get bogged down in the details, and that can show up with relationships to others, or it can be the self-criticalness, and often there can be both, you know, as hard on myself as I am on others. So that can be challenging for the Venus in Virgo. Evolving Venus in Virgo, if we take a slightly evolutionary standpoint, we would say acknowledging the need for growth and development and wanting to improve, which would be a Virgo theme generally, and perfecting, but doing it in a way which is, it's moving with the love principle, and it's not getting nitpicky and bitchy or hateful or anything like that. So that would be an evolving potential for Venus in Virgo. Now, esoterically, we kind of touched on it already, right? So this perception of truth gets bogged down or lost in the bits and pieces and the details. And it's too concerned with what's right here in substance to become aware of what that true self is. But when that awakening of the divine awareness through that third eye center, it can resolve those dualities that we see with Virgo, particularly being, with Venus is domicile to Gemini esoterically, and we see the merging of the opposites there, the spiritual and the material self. So in Virgo, then we have that mercurial duality through the forms itself. But when that can collapse through the enlightenment of that third eye, then we have a brilliancy of seeing the divine within the form that starts to bear a little bit of resemblance to Venus in Taurus. It's not so much an artistic precision though, but certainly the love and logic of the body and its processes, and the revelation of the divine feminine and nourishment. And it starts to kind of capture a little bit of the Taurus themes and the Cancer themes that we discussed before. So it starts to take on that quality, but it's really deep within those bits and pieces. Marion Woodman was an example for this placement that I really loved, and she was a Jungian psychologist and analyst, and she suffered from anorexia for many years, and she wrote a book, Addiction to Perfection, and all of this. But she has a beautiful transmission of that divine feminine, and she talks about it and talks about the nourishment of the body, and she really came to understand also what was going on with her eating disorder, and she then became somewhat specialized in terms of understanding some of the archetypal push and pulls with the mother energy, and how it's, being an anorexic times you don't eat, and you suppress the instinct, and then you wake up at 2 a.m. and then you binge on the chocolate cake. So then out comes the instinct. So it's a very kind of fourth ray quality with which she expressed it. And of course she would have had that strongly in her personality anyway, given that she became a psychologist. So there is a psychological element or a fourth ray element there in that example. But it's a beautiful evolution out of the perfectionistic quality and into a real divine acknowledgement of the integrity of the forms again. Again, very similar to Cancer. The other example I really love is Buckminster Fuller, who I've mentioned so many times as a strong Cancerian personality, a Taurus rising, and had Venus in Virgo. And the awakening of the spiritual consciousness in the form, in the womb. That's part of the fall, because any planet that falls, yeah, it's hard from the exoteric standpoint, but spiritually, esoterically, it's that quality going all the way down. And yeah, temporarily from the exoteric standpoint, it gets lost in that. But then you have the potential for that to really come up again through that core that it fell all the way down in and through and to, and really bring great consciousness from that. So fall planets end up being quite from the esoteric standpoint. And I was just referring to Alan's book here, and there was just a statement, a sentence that I wanted to read from him talking about Venus and Virgo. But this placement, when considered esoterically, expresses the deepest commitment love may unfold. The deepest commitment. The Son of Mind, the indwelling Christ principle, inherent in Virgo, to the gestational peace of the Christ, descends into matter. It is thus that pure love wisdom incarnates in the earth element, and the loving spirit descends, and remember Venus is exalted in Pisces, polar opposite. Loving spirit descends into the womb of Mother Matter. This fall is for the purpose of raising humanity up, and is one of the sacrifices love makes for mankind. A life is chosen by a soul-centered person with Venus in this position so that she can perform those healing tasks which allow the light of love to re-emerge from its protected but heretofore obscure dwelling place. Okay? Now, I've got to run for today. This ended up taking a little bit longer than I thought, but there's a lot to go through here when we compare the two different sites. So we'll come back soon with the next 6 signs of the zodiac. See you then.